Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward. Grateful you're tuning in for another conversation about faith. And today, we're talking about Hollywood in a sense, some famous people that converted to the Catholic faith, all because of a famed archbishop that you and I are very familiar with, Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. And so there's a new book out called Convert Maker. It is written by Cheryl Hughes, Dr. Hughes, who holds a doctorate in historical theology from Durham University in England. And she's written about Catherine Drexel in the past as well, and also about literature, art, and film. And listeners of the podcast know that I'm a great lover of film myself, and so I'm very much looking forward to our conversation about one of these heroic individuals of Hollywood and of the stars. So thanks so much, Dr. Hughes, for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, so, your book, Convert Maker, it's about Archbishop Fulton Sheen. He is, in fact, on the cover there and surrounded by others, and obviously, for you to want to write about Sheen probably means you have a devotion to him, at least, or an admiration for him. So I'm just wondering, what's your association with Sheen? How did you get introduced to him? And what motivated you or inspired you to write this book?
Well, I was a very young child, but I do remember a few times that he was on the television set in our house. And we were some of the last people to get a television set. So it probably was 55, 56 in there. And so I had seen Fulton Sheen. I had done the biography of Catherine Drexel, and I was quite interested in biography. I mean, at least you know what your parameters are. They're born and they die, and you sort of fill in between. And I was originally looking at Clare Boothe Luce, and I realized that somebody had else written a 2-volume, exhaustive biography of Clare Boothe Luce. However, in researching her, I found that she had been converted to the Catholic faith by Bishop Sheen. And then I started looking at other people who'd been converted to the Catholic Church by Bishop Sheen. And I thought, okay, here is my subject. It would be Bishop Sheen and his converts.
Yeah. Well, very good. Yeah. So I know that when you read Treasure in Clay, which is Archbishop Sheen's autobiography, that you do get a little bit of that. He does write about some of the converts that he accompanied. And I think, too, about Hollywood and just kind of some of the priestly influences beyond Sheen, maybe some before and some after Sheen. But the first, I think of is Father Daniel Lord. He was a Jesuit priest, dies in the 1950s. He wrote the Code of Ethics for Hollywood. There was a Father Bud Kaiser. All of that, and there's a documentary that just came out. It was on PBS. It's from the Paulist Fathers, but talking about Father Bud Kaiser, and basically all of these celebrities were drawn to Father Bud. They were willing to do his program Insight on television. And then I also think about Father Peyton, the servant of God, Father Peyton. And he, too, had this kind of the draw. He worked in Hollywood with family theater productions, and people were just drawn to him. I remember reading in his biography that I think it was maybe Frank Sinatra, that Frank Sinatra had no interest in going to Easter Mass, but when Father Peyton came in and said to him, "Hey, are you going to Mass tomorrow for Easter?" he felt compelled to do so. So you have the influence of these priestly figures then on Hollywood, on some of these actors. And maybe, that influence didn't go as far as we would have liked, to a total conversion, but surely it had some impact on them. So who are some of the people that Archbishop Sheen had an impact on?
In Hollywood, certainly Virginia Mayo, who was a very lovely actress and quite well known in the late 30s and into the 40s, even into the early 50s. She was converted by him and to the end of her life, she kept a picture of him on her dresser where he had signed to her, "God love you," but, Fulton J. Sheen. So that's pretty lovely. I also read where he had, now John Wayne had 3 wives, so I'm not sure which wife this was. And they were, I think they were all Hispanic. So if he was credited with converting one of them, it probably was more of a reversion, bringing her back to the Catholic Church. And the wife's witness was enough to make John Wayne a deathbed conversion. So only sort of tangentially can you hook up John Wayne with Fulton Sheen, but it's there nonetheless. He was, the comedians really picked up on him when he started doing his television show. Jackie Gleason and Milton Berle, those were big name comedians on the radio or on the television, at that time. And they were just amazed at Sheen. They just thought he was a genius of comedic genius, but also with important things to say. And so the two of them, Jackie Gleason wound up giving him $75,000 every year for the missions. So that's pretty good. His postulator thought that he had converted 42,000 people.
Wow. And I wonder how they come to that 42,000, right? Because obviously you have some of the people that you know of, like the ones you just mentioned, Judith Mayo, for example, or others. But then you have all of the people, because he had his television show, Life is Worth Living. And so there are countless people that probably watched that, encountered him in the living room or on the radio as they gathered around. And how do you count those people that he reached through the mass media? That would be my question, I guess.
Right. I agree. I don't really know what that number is based upon, but it's the postulator, so I think he must have thought about it a good bit.
Yeah.
He did run convert classes. The ones I write about in my book are public figures, and so he gave them individual instruction. But he ran convert classes of up to 100 people, and he would have them in high school auditoriums, and just, it was hard to find venues for those, but he would be running a 100-person class in New York, also down in Washington, D.C. So, maybe he just sort of counted up how many of those classes he ran, or how many years he ran them. At any rate, it was quite remarkable. And it was kind of a privilege, really, to get into the inside of these people who had actually been converted by him, because he was very bold in addressing them.
Yeah, he was definitely unafraid, and he wanted the truth to be proclaimed. Like he wouldn't sugarcoat it, trying to, appease someone. He would be very harsh, in that sense, but it was out of love for the soul and wanting what was right for them. You talked about these convert classes, and I'm a parish priest, so I'm very familiar with what used to be called RCIA. Now it's called OCIA. So I'm assuming that some of these people, maybe they needed to be baptized, but maybe they just needed to be received into communion in the church. So do you know, did he witness the reception of these people, or did he just accompany them and then turn them over to someone else to receive them into the church?
He would take them into the church personally.
Okay.
So they were his babies.
Yeah.
He wasn't about to give them away. Though one of the people in my book, Ada Smith, also called Bricktop, she was converted by his radio program, and then sought out a local parish church to be received into the Catholic Church. And he didn't really meet her for several years after that, but she really considered him the reason why she converted. So I felt it was safe to put her in the book too.
Sure.
Such a character.
So in the book Convert Maker, so when someone goes out, purchases the book and begins reading it, and I even saw it's on Audible. Now, one of the ways I love reading, if you will, is listening. So I do like listening to books, especially on, my 40-minute commute to Green Bay or whatever. But what can people expect? So do you designate like a chapter per person, or is it thematically arranged, or how's the book set up?
It's set up chronologically, and I weave in the convert stories in with really what's a full biography of Sheen.
Okay.
So what he was doing then, and what this convert was doing, and what that convert needed. So no, they were not standalone chapters. So I did give a couple of pages to each one so people could understand where they were coming from.
Sure. And so in total, like how many people do you think your book treats or addresses or incorporates?
Well, only 8 get full treatment, but there are other people who are essentially unknown. There's like a streetwalker whose name is Kitty, and he brought her into the church. And then she was forever sending him people to go to confession to him, say Kitty sent you. So, they're just not people that you can know anything about except that they existed and this is what they did.
Yeah, yeah. And I just I've been listening again, like I love audiobooks, so I've been listening to there's this new autobiography of Pope Francis that he entrusted to a journalist, and it's called Hope, I think. And so I've been listening to that, and I was struck by kind of some of the people that Pope Francis encountered in his life, and one including a woman from the streets, if you will, and when that person died, she ended up being reconciled to the church through Pope Francis at the time, the Archbishop in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. But he said in this autobiography that there's not a year that goes by on her death date that I don't remember her. And so you just think about all of these people that came into Sheen's life, and like this one person. So you mentioning that one person from the street just made me think of Pope Francis. But like, so we're kind of moved by the fact that Archbishop Sheen would make time for that person. But I think just thinking about Sheen and maybe the impression that person made on him as well. So there's a power in thinking of both sides of that relationship, I guess.
I
So
think it
so
is. I agree with you. And I think it's one of the things that sort of added to his awareness that he had let his ego get in the way, and that he needed to suppress his egotistical side of himself. I mean, of course, he was extremely successful. Everybody's applauding him. They're making him, Man of the Year for the Emmy Awards, and he was nominated every year after that. So it wasn't like he was just good one year and after that they let him go. But he looked at their lives and he found them very humbling, very humbling.
yeah, wow, yeah, it's impressive when you kind of enter into the life of someone else through an autobiography, through a biography, kind of as you've done as well. And for me, I struggled to read Sheen for a long time. Like everybody, everybody I knew was reading Sheen books, and I'm like, why can't I appreciate this guy? So what I had to do was I actually had to read Treasure in Clay, and after I read Treasure in Clay, I could read any book by Sheen. Like getting to know who he was allowed me to really appreciate then his thoughts.
One of the things that I was able to use in my research was the positio, which is, as you know, but maybe your listeners aren't aware, is the written biography for the first document that is given over to the Vatican in a cause for canonization. So it gives this autobiography. It also has hundreds of interviews with people who knew him. And I was able to use that, and there were a lot of gems buried in there that I had never seen anywhere else except in that. And that's where I picked up the 42,000 number
Okay.
of converts. So that really, the sister was very nice at the Sheen Foundation to lend
Oh
that
yeah.
for a while.
Yeah,
So,
I've met her. I've been down there. So you've been to Peoria, you've prayed at his tomb and everything?
yes, yes. Just this last summer, I wasn't able to go before the publication, or it was
Ah,
out of my hands by then. It was
sure, sure. What 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 what's your take on, the movement of Sheen's body, from New York to Peoria? Do you have an opinion about that? I know that was quite controversial.
It was controversial. He asked to be buried in what is it all of a
St.
sudden?
Mary's Cathedral.
No, St.
Oh,
Patrick's
St.
Cathedral
Patrick's. Okay.
in New York City. And oddly enough, he had a bit contretemps with Cardinal Spellman. They were buried together in the crypt down there. I don't know. If you have to have the body where you have the cause for canonization, I'm all for the cause for canonization. So I'm glad they were able to smooth that out. It was shocking to me when we got just a few days before the beatification and everything was suddenly put on hold because of an allegation somebody made from Rochester, where he had been the ordinary for a mere 3 years. So,
yeah. Do you think the beatification will ever take place?
I do. The objection that somebody raised turned out to be unfounded. It was investigated by the Vatican. It was investigated by the people from Peoria, Illinois, and certainly by the people who were in Rochester. So it turned out to be a false claim that has really done a wonderful person a grave misjustice. But I think he'll get around to it. I was thinking if I was rich enough, I'd send every bishop in the country a copy of the book so they would know who they are holding back, because he's just such a holy person and was so impactful on American lives.
Yeah, most definitely. And well, I could think of a few bishops you could send that book to, maybe if you just picked a handful. But anyways, I think about some of these churches throughout the country. Like I'm a priest in Wisconsin and Green Bay, but down at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, my understanding is at the Easter Vigil they brought in like 80 some odd people into the baptized into communion in the church and whatnot. I think of Bishop Barron and kind of his outreach, and a lot of people make the Sheen comparison to Bishop Barron, that he's kind of the modern day Sheen, if you will. And I guess that's my question. Do you see that there are other convert makers, if you will, out there in the world today in the church? And yeah, I guess, have you noticed that?
I really have, and certainly you bring up Bishop Barron. I think he's the number one person there that comes to mind. But then there's the Bible in a year and the Catechism in a year, and those were all extremely popular, and I'm sure have influenced people to come into the church. So I do think that there are other people out there using the media as maybe not quite as effectively as Bishop Barron uses it, but he's got a whole platform. That's very helpful. He's got his own platform.
Yeah. It took years for him to build that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah. So, great appreciation for Archbishop Fulton Sheen. If people were going to read something he wrote, what would you recommend? Like, what's one of those books that you think is a must read of Sheen's?
Well, I like The World's First Love on the Virgin Mary. And I also greatly like Peace of Soul. And it's
Yeah.
really, he had a little set to with Freudian psychiatry, which he condemned. And he really thought that what people needed were to have their sins forgiven. And so he really spoke against that. But he was also in favor of sort of talk therapy with psychologists and medication if you need it, and if there's a medical reason for whatever your problem is, that should be treated. He just didn't much care for Freudian psychiatry.
I see. Yeah, I know that Piece of Soul is a very popular book out there that I think Matthew Kelly's group republished it and had it as one of their dollar books or $2 books a parish could give away or whatever. So I know that book has definitely made its rounds. As you did your research, anything kind of surprise you about Fulton Sheen and his work of convert making?
Well, one thing that surprised me, here's this man who's incredibly popular. He's bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars for the missions. He's giving his own money to the missions. It said he gave away something like $200 million of his own, not that he raised by asking, but of his own from his speaking fees and his book fees. And he was extremely prolific. So I think that's very impressive. I didn't realize how prolific he really was. I know our here in our diocese, I think our seminarians all read "A Priest Is Not His Own." He said, we don't belong to ourselves. We don't belong to our families. We don't belong, we belong to the people. We are not our own.
I noticed in your biography that there was another book that you had written, and it was about, film literature and faith, maybe, or something like that. So tell me about your interest in film.
Well, I taught film for many years at the community college where I was teaching, also religious studies. And that particular book on literature, art, and film is on Chinese women in literature, art, and film.
Okay.
And it's an edited volume. So there are 10 chapters in there. And at least 2 of them talk about women in film. There's some in literature. There's others in dance. There's also, I believe, 2 directors who had been classmates of Jean Yumo. So at any rate, I had gone to the East-West Center in Hawaii 2 times, and then once with them to China. And I just was very interested in that. And I said, we got together and said, oh, let's write a book. We're all so excited. I said, okay, well, nothing came of that. And then I had already written my chapter for it. So I sent it to the East-West Center, and they said, well, why don't you take up the book again? So I took it up and just put out a request for chapters, and that's how they came in. I was very interested. Glad it worked out.
Well, wonderful. Now, kind of connecting that to Sheen a little bit, like, what's your impression then of like Sheen's impact on the entertainment industry, Hollywood, and such? Obviously through convert making, but do you see that there was any other impact that he made?
It's hard to know because, he would come down in the comedian side. He said he could never act. He believes everything he says, and he couldn't put on an act. It'd be too phony. So if you're looking at what he does on the television screen in 1950 with the first chapter, if you will, of Life is Worth Living in the 1950s, and then you jump up to the late 60s or 70s when he does another show, and if you look him on YouTube, it's the one in color. So we've gone from black and white to color. I think the aesthetic and what people expect from television changed in the 10 to 20 years between his first time and his second time of doing Life is Worth Living. In fact, it wasn't even called Life is Worth the Living. I think it was called the Sheen Hour or something like that. But later, to sell it, some entrepreneurial people called it Life is Worth Living. So most people don't know the difference, but if it's black and white, it's the original. If it's color, it's the more modern one. And then the more modern ones were not particularly as well received. And I think that's because there was a big change. Sheen did not change. The country changed. We just expected more. Not that he had low production values, but it was really very simple. He was a guy in a skirt on a flat stage. There was a statue of the Virgin Mary, a cross, but with no corpus. We didn't want to offend any Protestants who were listening. A blackboard, and that's really basically it. And he just talked straight for 20 some minutes.
Yeah. Now, why do you think Sheen is still relevant today? Why are people still drawn to him?
I think he was incredibly prescient. I think we're beginning to see and to credit him. He was saying that if the United States fails, it will fail from within, not from without, that it will just give itself up. And we're still fighting communism. We're still fighting that the whole world needs the brotherhood of man, which is what the communists offered. but they offered it, at the end of a steel fist. But the tendencies are still out there, and they're still to be guarded against. So I think he was very prescient about how the world would work. One of his lines, and I think this is pretty up to date. He said that the progressives love their cause much less than they hate the person who's against it. You think about that. And I think you can see that in kind of the knee-jerk relationships that we see on television today amongst various political factions. So it's he's very telling. I think he was quite precedent. He thought he would make Rochester a microcosm of post-Vatican II diocese, what it could be. But unfortunately, he had only spent about 8 months ever in a regular parish as an assistant associate pastor. After that, he was on the radio. He was teaching at the university, the Catholic University of America, then in New York on radio and television. It just, he was used to calling his own shots. So he wanted it to have this sort of collaborative feel that he felt from the Vatican II. But for instance, he formed a lay committee to serve to vet applications to the seminary there. And after the first meeting, he called a second meeting, but he left off the women, didn't want them. And after the second meeting, he left off the men. He didn't really want to be told by anybody what to do. So, it's just, he was in charge, and you can't really do that in a diocese quite the way that he was expecting. But he didn't really understand what young priests went through. I think you probably remember from Treasures in Clay that he wanted to give away an inner city church and school. Now the church was dying on the vine. It wasn't thriving. Nobody was going there. So he decided that one of the biggest problems in the city of Rochester was that they needed low-income housing. And so he offered the church and the land and the school basically to be raised to the federal government to build low-income housing. But guess what? He forgot to tell the parish priest that's what he was doing. And he read about it in the New York Times. It's just like, you wouldn't do that. So he was not really a good administrator in that way. Eventually, he founded a foundation to pay for low-income housing. So he did do that. And sadly enough, that church finally did get closed down, and it was just kind of standing derelict in the middle of the city.
Well, we've been talking about Fulton Sheen today, about his life, especially his role as a convert maker, and how he accompanied thousands of people to embracing the Catholic faith. And you tell some of those stories in your new book, Convert Maker, which is available from Ignatius Press. So people can head over to Ignatius Press and get a copy and fall in love even more with Fulton Sheen. And if somebody gets a chance, I highly recommend going to Peoria. The cathedral is open for a few hours in the afternoon for praying at the tomb, and then to head over to the Sheen Center there as well. So he's left behind a great legacy, and you are helping to unpack that legacy for us. So thanks so much for this wonderful book.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your invitation to be with you today.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FrEdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.